What happens when Hollywood finally turns around, looks a former duchess dead in the eyes, and says, "No one helps you anymore"? What happens when the people who once welcomed you with open arms, directors, producers, studio handlers, PR executives, start locking every door you try to push open? And what does it mean when one of Amazon MGM Studios' rising directors, Jason Orley, allegedly delivers the final blow? A quiet but devastating message that Meghan Markle is not welcome, not trusted, and absolutely not returning? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It's a question that feels bigger than one rejection, because this isn't just about one pitch meeting gone wrong or one creative partnership collapsing. This is about a pattern, one that Hollywood has been whispering about for months, maybe years, depending on who you talk to. And yet, somehow, Meghan still didn't see it coming. But before we even get into Jason Orley's alleged statement, before we reach the moment that insiders say made studio corridors fall silent, you have to understand the atmosphere Meghan walked into. Because Hollywood is a place built on smoke, mirrors, and loyalty. And when someone breaks that loyalty, publicly, loudly, repeatedly, Hollywood doesn't forget. It doesn't even forgive slowly. It just stops picking up your calls. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone burn bridge after bridge, convinced they're building a highway? Have you ever seen a person genuinely believe the world is conspiring against them, when really, they've been the one swinging the match the entire time? That's where this story begins. Not with the drama of the confrontation, not with the accusation of traitor, not with the closed-door meeting where Orley allegedly shut down Meghan's return before her team could even warm the chairs. No, this story begins with expectation, with entitlement, with a misplaced belief that Hollywood was waiting, arms wide open, ready to rebuild Meghan as the comeback queen she always believed she could be. But Hollywood had moved on. Imagine Meghan's perspective for a moment. She had just spent years shaping a public identity built around reinvention. She had distanced herself from the monarchy, from family ties, from former co-stars, from past friends. And every time someone questioned her version of events, she doubled down, tripled down. She even turned the royal drama into content. Interviews, podcasts, series, documentaries. And for a while, it worked. There was interest. There was noise. There was attention. But noise fades. Attention moves on. And Netflix, her biggest supporter, started to cool off. Spotify openly removed itself from the Meghan content pipeline. Executives whispered. Hollywood agents rolled their eyes. The industry began shifting its energy toward new talent, new voices, new creative forces who weren't attached to constant controversy. But Meghan didn't see any of this as a warning. She saw it as a challenge, a misunderstanding, a temporary detour. And so she began looking for a new home, a new studio, a new partnership. That's where Amazon MGM Studios comes in. One of the fastest growing creative hubs in Hollywood. A place known for producing fresh talent, sharp storytelling, and creators who actually deliver. And at the center of this momentum was Jason Orley, writer, director, and someone who had earned his reputation through sheer output and professionalism. Meghan believed she could walk into this environment and reclaim her Hollywood standing. She believed producers would welcome her. She believed directors would rush to collaborate. She believed her royal past was still an asset, not a liability. But the people at Amazon MGM knew something Meghan didn't. Hollywood had already begun its silent retreat. Even worse, they had already begun discussing why. Here's the part no one expected. The studio wasn't just reluctant. It wasn't just skeptical. It wasn't just cautious. It was protective. Protective of their brand. Protective of their reputation. Protective of the people who actually made the studio thrive. And that's why the moment Meghan's name came up in internal conversations, voices got tense. Conversations got shorter. Shoulders stiffened. Eyes exchanged nervous glances. Because Hollywood can handle drama, but what it can't handle is unpredictability. And insiders say Meghan represented unpredictable risk. Not the creative kind. Not the genre-bending kind. Not the visionary kind. The reputational kind. And in Hollywood, that's worse than failure. But Meghan didn't know any of this. Not at first. Not when she began crafting her new pitch. Not when she started assembling her PR strategy. Not when she tried opening doors that had quietly been sealed. She walked into the Amazon MGM orbit with the same confidence she once used with Netflix and Oprah and Spotify. But this time, something felt different. She could sense it, but she couldn't explain it. She felt the pause, the hesitation, the polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the tight nods, the unreturned emails, the invitations that never materialized. Hollywood wasn't saying no. Hollywood was saying nothing. And silence is the loudest answer of all. But even silence wasn't the moment that changed everything. Because industry silence can be reversed, handled, massaged, rebranded. No, the turning point came later. When Meghan discovered that Jason Orley had allegedly made a decision. A firm one. A personal one. A decision that wasn't just about business or branding or public relations. A decision rooted in something deeper. Something emotional. Something moral. A decision that would follow Meghan everywhere she went next. And that moment, that comment, that line, is what we're building toward. Because once Jason Orley reportedly said she was not welcome, once he allegedly called her a traitor, the studio walls didn't just close. They locked. But what pushed him to that point? What detail did Meghan never see coming? What action, what attitude, what revelation made a respected Hollywood director refuse to even entertain the idea of associating with her? That part is still ahead. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Because in Hollywood, a shift doesn't always arrive with a dramatic explosion or a public announcement. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a door clicking shut behind you. Sometimes it arrives in a subtle conversation in a hallway you weren't invited into. Sometimes it arrives in the form of someone else's decision, someone who doesn't even owe you an explanation. And that's exactly what happened to Meghan. A shift, a decision, a quiet refusal that carried the weight of 1,000 slammed doors. But before we get to that moment, let's rewind just a few steps. Because the truth is, Meghan didn't walk into Amazon MGM Studios as a blank slate. She walked in carrying years of headlines, contradictions, accusations, rebrands, reinventions, relaunches, resets, restarts, and Hollywood had watched every single one. Question for you. How many times can someone reinvent themselves before people start asking what exactly they're running from? Because Meghan has run from a lot. Hollywood, the royal family, her own family, staff members, public commitments, creative projects, partnerships that didn't go the way she expected. And every time something didn't fit, she reshaped the narrative. Every time a relationship strained, she reframed the story. Every time a headline turned against her, she brought out a new version of herself. But here's the contradiction that Hollywood couldn't ignore. How can someone demand loyalty from a world they've never shown loyalty to? That question, that single contradiction, became the pulse of the entire Meghan, Amazon MGM situation. Because when Meghan arrived in the orbit of Amazon MGM Studios, she wasn't just another actress. She wasn't just another producer. She wasn't just another public figure looking for a fresh pitch meeting. She was a brand wrapped in controversy, a personality surrounded by suspicion, an image that required constant maintenance, a figure who brought as many risks as she brought opportunities, maybe more. Amazon MGM Studios is a place obsessed with growth, stability, talent, and trust. Trust is their currency. Trust is their foundation. Trust is the glue that keeps the machine running. And that's where Jason Orley comes into this story. Jason Orley isn't just a director. He's a builder, a craftsperson, a storyteller who earned every step he climbed. Someone who spent years proving himself in writers' rooms, on sets, in editing suites, and at production tables until Amazon MGM finally recognized him as a long-term creative force. He understands risk. He understands image. He understands momentum. And insiders say he also understands something else. You don't let someone into your creative environment if you don't trust how they treat the people in their life. When Orley first heard Meghan's name being floated, casually mentioned in possible development conversations, he wasn't excited. He wasn't curious. He wasn't intrigued. He was cautious. He was alert. He was skeptical. Because Orley, like many directors, values a stable set, a predictable environment, a cast and crew dynamic built on reliability, not chaos. But Meghan carries chaos like a shadow, not always intentionally, Not always dramatically, but inevitably. And the problem with chaos is that it infects everything it touches. Insiders claim Orley didn't even want to entertain the idea of bringing Meghan into any project connected to him. Not as a collaborator, not as an actress, not as a creative partner, not even as a cameo suggestion. Why? Because chaos spreads. Because reputational risk spreads. Because Hollywood isn't a place where you get infinite chances. Because Meghan wasn't coming in with a clean track record. She was coming in with a loaded one. But Meghan didn't see the warning signs. She didn't hear the whispers. She didn't catch the hesitations. She believed Amazon MGM would see her the way she saw herself. A misunderstood creative voice suppressed by the monarchy and finally unleashed upon Hollywood with a fresh message. But that wasn't the perception anymore. Not after the headlines. Not after the Spotify implosion. Not after the Netflix fatigue. Not after the staff turnover. Not after the public contradictions. Not after the car chase fiasco. Not after the podcast controversies. Not after the endless rebranding attempts. The Meghan Markle brand had become unpredictable, and unpredictability is poison in Hollywood. Still, Meghan tried to push forward. Her team crafted a pitch. Her PR advisors prepared a narrative. She approached Amazon MGM with renewed energy, convinced that she could align herself with one of the hottest creative studios in the country. But instead of enthusiasm, instead of curiosity, she met resistance. Not openly, not rudely, not directly, but subtly, quietly, professionally. Meetings that never confirmed. Executives that never followed up. Assistants who had to reschedule indefinitely. Polite nods and frozen smiles. These weren't coincidences. They were signals. Signals that Meghan mistook for normal scheduling conflicts, until one detail reached her team. A detail about Jason Orley. A detail that changed the entire tone. Because insiders say Orley didn't just decline involvement. He didn't just say no. He didn't just pass politely. He allegedly shut the door. Completely. Permanently. One insider said the moment Orley heard someone propose Meghan in any capacity, he responded instantly, without hesitation. No, absolutely not. Don't involve me. Another insider claims his language was even sharper. She's not welcome here. And then, the word that would later echo through the studio halls. The one that stuck. Traitor. Now here's the twist. Orley wasn't talking about the monarchy. He wasn't talking about the royal family. He wasn't talking about political betrayal or media betrayal or institutional betrayal. He was talking about personal behavior, about loyalty, about actions, about the way Meghan treats people who help her and the way she discards them when they no longer fit her storyline. Because in Hollywood, betrayal isn't defined by crowns or palaces. It's defined by what you do to the people who trust you. And according to studio insiders, that's where Meghan failed. But Meghan didn't know any of this. Not at first. Not when she walked into Amazon MGM thinking she could pick up where she left off. Not when she believed her royal past was an asset instead of a liability. She didn't know the conversations that were happening behind the scenes. She didn't know the reputation she was carrying into the room. She didn't know that Orley had already made up his mind. She didn't know that a single word, traitor, had already attached itself to her Hollywood shadow. But she was about to find out. Because the moment her team learned Orley had taken a firm, personal stance against working with her, the energy shifted. Suddenly the hesitations made sense. Suddenly the silence was loud. Suddenly the missing invitations were obvious. Suddenly the closed doors weren't just bureaucratic delays, they were rejections. And once Meghan learned the truth, once she realized her Hollywood comeback was facing a wall, she didn't retreat. She pushed harder. She tried again. She attempted a second entry. She believed she could win them over. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, what no one on her team warned her about, is that the studio had already moved past the question of whether she was right for a project. They had already concluded she wasn't right for the studio. Because Orley's stance wasn't just personal. It spread. It influenced. It became the unspoken rule. And that's exactly where the Real story begins. Because the next move Meghan made, the one she thought would help her, only made things 10 times worse. And what comes next will reveal exactly how one miscalculation turned Meghan's hopeful comeback into a full-blown Hollywood shutdown. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever watched a room change the moment a single name is mentioned? Not because the person is powerful, not because the person is feared, but because the person has become complicated. That was the energy inside Amazon MGM Studios the day Meghan Markle's name resurfaced. A subtle shift, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. A quiet exhale here, a raised eyebrow there, a producer glancing up from their laptop, a junior assistant freezing mid-typing. It wasn't drama. It wasn't shock. It was discomfort. Because Meghan wasn't just another celebrity hoping for a fresh creative partnership. She was a walking history book of controversy, contradictions, and unfinished stories. And Hollywood has learned, painfully, that working with Meghan means inheriting all her unresolved chapters. But here's the twist. Meghan didn't walk in with controversy on her mind. She walked in with confidence. She believed she was stepping into a room ready to rebuild her. She believed Amazon MGM would be her redemption arc, her victory lap, her reintroduction to an industry she left behind in search of royalty, only to return, bruised again, and heavily repackaged. But the studio wasn't feeling that energy at all. Something had changed, something fundamental, something she didn't expect. And this chapter, this is about that shift. Let's start where the confusion began. Meghan's team had been quietly planting seeds for months, floating her name, positioning her, leaking hints of upcoming projects, whispers of new scripts, talk of creative partnerships, and fresh talent direction. Their messaging was simple. Meghan was ready to work with Hollywood again. Hollywood should feel lucky. Hollywood should welcome her back. But Hollywood didn't feel lucky. Hollywood felt tired. Because Hollywood had given her the most precious resource it has, attention. Netflix gave her a massive platform. Spotify gave her a microphone. Producers gave her sympathy. Executives gave her patience. Fans gave her curiosity. And what did Meghan deliver? Drama, inconsistency, contradictions, half-finished ideas. A podcast that was more celebrity chit-chat than creative innovation. A docuseries that burned bridges faster than it built audience loyalty. A brand that felt more like a paradox than a product. She didn't leave a trail of success. She left a trail of exhaustion. So when her name crossed the minds of Amazon MGM executives, the reaction wasn't, "Interesting, tell me more." It was, "Oh no, not this again." But Meghan didn't know that. Her team didn't know that. Or maybe they refused to see it. Because when you've lived several years believing you're the main character, it's hard to accept that the audience has moved on. Picture it. Deep inside Amazon MGM Studios, in a sleek glass conference room overlooking Los Angeles. Her name came up during a creative development discussion. It wasn't even the focus of the meeting. It was a side comment. A what if tossed into the air. What about Meghan Markle? And that's when the room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but like the temperature dropped just a few degrees. One of the junior execs lowered their pen. Another person subtly exhaled. A producer cleared their throat. A development assistant scribbled something that looked suspiciously like "N.O." No one wanted to say it out loud. Not yet. Not until the biggest voice in the room spoke. Jason Orley. He wasn't the loudest person in the meeting. He wasn't even the most senior. But his opinion carried weight. He had earned trust through consistency. He had earned his seat through talent. He had earned influence by not wasting people's time. So when he reacted, even subtly, people paid attention. The moment Meghan's name left someone's mouth, Orley leaned back in his chair, eyes sharpening, expression tightening. Not angry, not annoyed, but alert, cautious, concerned, as if someone had suggested inviting a tornado into a garden. He didn't speak at first. He let the silence do the talking. And the silence spoke volumes. Because silence in Hollywood means something. It means, this is risky. This is complicated. This is the wrong direction. And yet the person who suggested the name didn't notice the energy shift. They kept talking. They explained how Meghan's brand still had global recognition, how she could attract international viewers, how her connection to royalty gave her a storytelling angle others couldn't replicate. On paper, it sounded logical. But Hollywood doesn't run on paper. It runs on reputation. And Meghan's reputation had quietly drifted from intriguing to draining. Orley heard the pitch. He listened. He processed. Then, finally, he asked the question that froze the room more than any rejection could have. Why would we trust someone who already betrayed the biggest institution she was ever part of? The room went silent. The kind of silence that feels like a dropped glass in a library. Sharp, bare, uncomfortable. Because no one expected him to say it. No one expected him to frame it that bluntly. No one expected him to cut through the PR spin with surgical precision. And here's the thing. He didn't mean royalty in the royal sense. He meant institution as in family, partnership, alliance, commitment, loyalty. Because in Hollywood, loyalty is the only thing that survives chaos. And Meghan's pattern told a story no pitch deck could erase. This was the first sign, the first crack, the first moment that signaled Meghan's Hollywood return would not be the victory lap she imagined. But it didn't stop there. Because after that meeting, conversations didn't just continue. They escalated. Executives whispered in hallways. Assistants texted each other. People who had once been neutral toward Meghan quickly became cautious. Her name wasn't warm. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't even polarizing. It was contaminated. And Jason Orley? He hadn't even reached his strongest reaction yet. Because a few days later, when her name came up again in a separate discussion, this time in relation to a potential production partnership, Orley didn't stay quiet. He didn't ask a question. He made a statement. A clear one. A firm one. The one insider's claim started everything. She's not coming here. She's not welcome. 6 words. 6 simple, blunt words that carried the weight of an entire industry's fatigue. And he didn't stop there. Because the next sentence, the one whispered enough times to become legend, was the line that turned this story from Hollywood gossip into Hollywood history. She's a traitor. But here's the twist. That word wasn't about the monarchy. It wasn't about titles. It wasn't about Buckingham Palace. It was about the people she turned on, the teams she discarded, the staff she blamed, the stories she revised, the alliances she abandoned. In Orley's world, a world built on consistency, loyalty, trust, Meghan represented the opposite. And he wasn't willing to risk his career, his projects, or his team on someone whose loyalty lasted only as long as their usefulness. But that wasn't the end. Because Meghan's team wasn't going to take silence as an answer. They were determined. They believed they could turn the tables. They had no idea what they were walking into. And what happened next is the moment that transformed Meghan's Hollywood comeback attempt into a studio-wide shutdown. A moment of escalation that no one, not even Jason Orley, could have predicted. But this next twist, this next reveal, this next move by Meghan, is where the story explodes into something much bigger. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Because Meghan's team, fueled by confidence, pride, and a belief that Hollywood still needed her more than she needed them, made a move that would only deepen the divide. A move that insiders still talk about. A move that revealed just how disconnected Meghan was from the way the industry actually viewed her. Instead of pulling back, instead of reassessing, instead of recognizing the signs, Meghan doubled down. She instructed her team to secure a direct line to Amazon MGM leadership. Top level. No intermediaries. No assistants. No development producers. She wanted the biggest seat in the room, the highest voice at the table. And that right there, that small but telling decision, exposed the core contradiction that defined Meghan's Hollywood struggle. She wanted elite access without elite results. Question for you. Have you ever seen someone demand VIP treatment when they're barely on the guest list anymore? Because that's what it felt like internally. Her request didn't read as confidence. It read as entitlement. It read as someone skipping steps everyone else worked years to climb. And in Hollywood, skipping steps is one of the fastest ways to make enemies. Still, her team pushed forward. They reached out to senior executives. They name-dropped. They invoked her past connections. They emphasized her global influence. They pitched her as a cultural lightning bolt and a brand-building powerhouse. But the executives weren't buying it. One insider said it plainly. She was trying to walk into a room as royalty, but Hollywood doesn't care about crowns. It cares about what you bring to the table. And Meghan wasn't bringing a hit. She wasn't bringing proof of concept. She wasn't bringing stability. She wasn't bringing a fan base that wasn't exhausted by constant controversy. In fact, she was bringing the opposite. Her entire brand felt radioactive. Not because people hated her, but because people didn't trust her. And that's when Jason Orley entered the picture again. This time, decisively. Because while executives tiptoed, strategized, sugar-coated, and wove diplomatic excuses, Orley didn't bother with any of that. He was done being subtle, done being polite, done pretending Meghan could be part of the studio's future. So when her team attempted to escalate the conversation to senior leadership, the message came back stronger, firmer, clearer. She's not welcome here. This wasn't logistical. This wasn't bureaucratic. This wasn't about schedules or budgets or creative direction. This was personal, deeply personal. And here's the twist. It wasn't just personal for Orley. It had become personal for many inside the studio. Because Meghan hadn't simply failed to impress Hollywood. She had actively depleted its patience. People were tired. Tired of the constant drama orbiting her name. Tired of the PR spin. Tired of the entitlement. Tired of the shallow pitches. Tired of the never-ending reinventions that never delivered. Hollywood is brutal, yes, but it's also allergic to instability. And Meghan, in their eyes, was instability wrapped in a designer trench coat. Yet she didn't see that. She only saw a studio refusing to embrace her brilliance. And so she interpreted the rejection as sabotage. Here's where things get even more dramatic. Because instead of pulling back, Meghan tried something bold. Her team requested a face-to-face meeting with Orley, a meeting to clear misunderstandings, a meeting to resolve any apprehensions, a meeting to start the relationship on honest footing. But insiders say Orley didn't even entertain the idea. He shut it down instantly. No meeting, no collaboration, no conversation. And then, the word that sealed everything. Traitor. Let's pause here, because this is important. Orley wasn't calling Meghan a traitor to the monarchy. He wasn't talking about Harry. He wasn't talking about titles. He wasn't talking about palace politics. He was talking about the way she treated people. People who supported her. People who defended her. People who promoted her. People who believed in her. People she later scapegoated when things went wrong. Her pattern wasn't royal drama. It was relational fallout. Former colleagues. Former friends. Former staff. Former collaborators. And Hollywood has a long memory. People talk. People warn. People watch. No one wants to be the next person she turns on, an insider explained. And that right there, that fear, became the reason Amazon MGM Studios closed the door before Meghan could even reach it. Now, imagine being Meghan at this moment. She's expecting open arms. She's expecting opportunity. She's expecting eagerness. She's expecting admiration. Instead, she gets a wall. A cold, unyielding wall with Jason Orley standing in front of it like a gatekeeper. Her team scrambled. They tried new angles, new messaging, new positioning, new promises, new presentations. But it didn't matter. The decision wasn't tactical. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't political. It was instinctual. No, no, no. Every path led back to the same response. And then something unexpected happened. Someone inside Amazon MGM, someone who previously supported giving Meghan a small off-camera role, maybe narration, maybe consulting, approached Jason Orley privately. They asked him why he reacted so strongly, why he didn't even consider giving Meghan a second chance, why he used such harsh language. And Orley, according to the source, didn't sugarcoat it. He said, "You can't trust someone who keeps burning the people who help them climb." That line, that single sentence, that core belief, that emotional conviction, is what turned Orley's stance from a private decision into a studio-wide tone-setter. Because his reputation wasn't hysterical. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't insecure. It was reliable. And when a reliable person reacts dramatically, people listen. Suddenly Meghan's Hollywood resurrection wasn't simply in jeopardy. It was collapsing. But Meghan didn't know yet. She only sensed the coldness, felt the distance, saw the fading enthusiasm. She didn't understand the reason. Not fully. Not yet. Her team assumed it was bureaucracy, scheduling, competition, internal reshuffling. They had no idea the real reason was personal, rooted in trust, rooted in fear, rooted in the belief that Meghan Markle represented a ticking time bomb in any creative space. And just when Meghan began pushing even harder, just when she attempted one last aggressive move to force the studio into a conversation, something happened behind the scenes. Something bigger, something irreversible, something that guaranteed Meghan would never set foot in Amazon MGM Studios in any creative capacity. And what came next would change everything. and no one saw it coming. What if I told you Meghan Markle walked into a Hollywood pitch thinking she was about to rebuild her empire, while the room she entered had already decided she would never be allowed in? What if I told you the most devastating rejection wasn't a loud no, but a series of looks, silences, and quiet conclusions drawn long before she spoke a single word? And what if I told you the moment that doomed her comeback wasn't the end of the meeting, but the beginning? Because this chapter, this moment, is about the pitch meeting that Meghan believed could transform her career. The meeting she thought would impress Amazon MGM. The meeting she imagined would reignite her creative reputation, spark a bidding war, and put her right back onto the Hollywood stage she once left behind. But instead, it became the cautionary tale whispered in studio corridors. Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever walked into a room believing you're the most interesting person there, only to discover everyone is silently hoping you'll leave? That's the energy Meghan didn't see, couldn't see, refused to see. And that is where this chapter begins. Meghan arrived prepared, or at least she believed she was. Polished, poised, camera-ready, even though there were no cameras. Her team had coached her on tone, posture, pacing, even subtle emotional cues. She had practiced anecdotes, practiced dramatic pauses, practiced language designed to sound visionary, pioneering, inspiring. But here's the contradiction no one warned her about. Meghan had prepared for a room that admired her. She was walking into a room that feared her. That's the part she didn't know. Not yet. Because Amazon MGM studio executives weren't approaching this meeting with excitement. They weren't approaching it with curiosity. They weren't even approaching it with professional neutrality. They were approaching it with caution. Why? Because the last time a major streaming platform gave Meghan a powerful opportunity, a massive multi-million-dollar Netflix deal, the result wasn't harmony. It was turbulence. The docuseries brought headlines, yes. It brought clicks, yes. It brought controversy, absolutely. But it didn't bring credibility. It didn't bring trust. It didn't bring confidence for future collaborations. Hollywood loves drama, but only if it produces results. And Meghan's drama produced chaos instead. So by the time she entered Amazon MGM's building, polished pitch deck in hand, the studio team wasn't thinking, this could be good. They were thinking, please don't let this turn into another disaster. But Meghan didn't know. She walked in smiling, confident, radiating the energy of someone who believed she already had a foot through the door. Her entrance was crisp, rehearsed. Her tone warm but assertive. Her energy forward, not collaborative. And right away, the room tensed. Executives exchanged subtle glances, the kind of micro-expressions that say everything while saying nothing. Because here's a secret. Hollywood doesn't react to what you say. Hollywood reacts to who you are when you say it. And Meghan had built a reputation, not entirely fair, but undeniably present, that she didn't work with Hollywood. She used Hollywood, then moved on, then rewrote the story, then used the new version to advance her narrative, then repeated the cycle. That reputation entered the room before she did. Still, she began her pitch. Her voice was steady, her posture strong. She spoke about empowerment, identity, women's voices, breaking systems, storytelling that changes lives, narratives that challenge oppressive structures, a series of inspiring, but broad, but vague themes. But here's the problem. It didn't feel like content. It felt like a speech. Hollywood executives want specificity, not slogans. They want plots, characters, arcs, tension, pacing, hooks, emotional turns, structure, concrete deliverables. But Meghan delivered concepts, vibes, ideas, brand messaging. Imagine pitching a movie by saying, it's about the journey of self-discovery and unraveling the deeper truth of one's identity. Executives hear 4 words. You have no story. That's what was happening. Her pitch was polished, yes, but shallow, glossy, aesthetic, all frosting, no cake. A high-level idea with no spine. One insider later described the meeting like this. She talked for 20 minutes and still didn't say what the actual project was. And here's the twist. She didn't notice the confusion because she assumed their silence was admiration, not concern, not frustration, not disappointment. After all, silence had always meant interest in Meghan's world. Journalists paused to write. Cameras paused to capture her best angles. Interviewers paused to let her lead the narrative. Fans paused to hear every detail. But these executives were not pausing because they were impressed. They were pausing because they didn't know what she was pitching. Still, Meghan continued. She referenced her experience, her visibility, her global influence, her royal background, her philanthropic branding, her journey as a symbolic disruptor. But those points weren't landing the way she expected. Because the Meghan Markle brand had become unpredictable, her visibility was high, her headlines were constant, her controversies were exhausting, her associations were messy, and Hollywood hates messy, especially when the mess becomes their problem. One executive later quoted said, "It wasn't that she was a bad presenter. It was that she didn't seem aware of how much baggage walked in with her." And then it happened, the moment that changed the tone of the entire meeting. Meghan compared herself to another woman, a major talent, a respected writer, a beloved producer, someone with hits, someone with credibility, someone who earned her status from the ground up, someone Jason Orley deeply admired. Insiders didn't name the figure, but multiple reports say it was someone known for loyalty, the very trait Meghan lacked in Hollywood's eyes. When Meghan drew the comparison, the room froze. You could feel the shift. Because the comparison wasn't just uncomfortable, it was insulting. It's like someone who hasn't finished a single script comparing themselves to Shonda Rhimes, or someone who starred in a basic cable drama comparing themselves to Viola Davis, or someone with one podcast comparing themselves to Oprah. It wasn't confidence. It was delusion, and the executives knew it. Worse, Jason Orley later heard about this comparison secondhand, and that's when everything escalated. When Meghan left the room, she believed she had impressed them. She believed they were simply processing. She believed they were considering options. She expected follow-ups, phone calls, engagements, development notes, interest. But instead, the internal discussions were brutal, confused, frustrated, tense. One executive said, "She pitched a brand, not a product." Another said, "She wants to be the headline, not the creator." A third said, "She didn't come in as a collaborator. She came in expecting to be crowned." And then there was Jason Orley. Once he heard the details of the meeting, and especially the comparison she made, he finally snapped. He asked one question, just one. But it was enough to kill every possible path forward for Meghan at Amazon MGM. If she's willing to turn on her own family, what do you think she'll do to us when things get tough? That question ended the conversation. Full stop. Because Hollywood knows the pattern. A person who burns bridges, burns more bridges. A person who blames collaborators will blame you next. A person who revises the truth will revise the project. A person who abandons commitments will abandon your deadlines, too. Orley wasn't being dramatic. He was being practical. But the kicker? He didn't stop at one question. After hearing everything about the meeting, the vagueness, the entitlement, the comparisons, he delivered a verdict that spread through the studio like wildfire. She's a traitor. Not a traitor to the crown. Not a traitor to the royals. A traitor to the people she works with. And in Hollywood, that is the deadliest accusation of all. Because nobody wants to partner with a person who might betray them the moment it suits the narrative. Meghan had no idea any of this was happening. Not yet. She thought she had time. Thought she had options. Thought she had momentum. But behind the scenes, her entire comeback was collapsing in slow motion. And when her team tried to follow-up emails were ignored. Follow-up calls went unanswered. Follow-up proposals were politely rejected. She thought she was experiencing scheduling delays. She wasn't. She was experiencing reputational judgment. Her brand wasn't a selling point. It was a liability. The executives weren't silent because they were considering her pitch. They were silent because they were hoping she would go away quietly. And Meghan didn't understand that. Not yet. Because the next time her name came up internally, in a completely separate planning session, Jason Orley didn't ask a question. He didn't speak cautiously. He didn't leave room for persuasion. He said the words that became infamous inside the studio. No more discussions. No meetings. She's not welcome here. Permanent. Firm. Final. And that line, combined with the infamous traitor label, became the invisible stamp that followed Meghan everywhere she tried to go afterward. But here's the twist. Meghan still believed she had one more chance, one more strategy, one more angle, and she used it. But the move she made next? The one she thought would reopen the door? It would end up slamming it even harder. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What do you do when the one question you hoped no one would ask becomes the only question that matters? Because that's exactly what happened inside Amazon MGM Studios after Meghan Markle's pitch. It wasn't the presentation. It wasn't the vagueness. It wasn't the comparisons she made. It wasn't even the entitlement dripping between her sentences. It was the question Jason Orley asked, quietly, calmly, surgically, that sliced through every ounce of PR spin her team had tried to wrap around her. And the question was this: why would we trust someone who already exposed her own family? Those 13 words weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. They weren't an outburst. They were logic. Cold, painful, inconvenient logic. Let me ask you this. If someone betrayed the people closest to them, the people who raised them, supported them, protected them, why would you think you'd be the exception? Why would Hollywood think they'd be treated any better? Why would a director, a producer, a studio, or a creative team gamble their careers on someone whose track record screams unpredictability? This wasn't personal. It was practical. It was survival. Hollywood survival. Because Meghan Markle wasn't walking around with a creative reputation. She was walking around with a warning label. And Jason Orley was the first person willing to read it out loud. The room freezes. When Orley asked the question, the room didn't argue back. No one pushed against him. No one defended Meghan. No one said, "That's unfair." Silence. A heavy, sinking silence. Because everyone in that room, executives, assistants, creatives, coordinators, had been thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. Because no one wants to be accused of attacking Meghan. No one wants the headlines. No one wants the backlash. No one wants to be called a bigot, a misogynist, or a villain. So everyone dances around the reality. Tiptoes. Deflects. Uses corporate language to avoid the truth. But Jason Orley didn't. And the moment he asked the question, it became clear. He wasn't scared of Meghan's narrative. He wasn't intimidated by the headlines. He wasn't controlled by fear of being misunderstood. He was speaking from experience, from observation, from the simple truth that Meghan Markle had a habit of poisoning every environment she entered, not with malice, but with narrative instability. She rewrote stories. She reframed events. She painted herself as the victim even when others carried the burden. Hollywood doesn't just avoid people who cause drama. Hollywood avoids people who rewrite the drama afterward. Because if a project fails, a studio can live with that. But if a project fails and you become the villain in Meghan's next interview, that's the nightmare. That's the risk. That's the reason Orley's question slammed the brakes on everything. The fear inside Hollywood. See, Hollywood has a quiet rule. Not written, not official, not in any contracts or handbooks, but real. The reputation risk rule. If someone is known to turn on their partners publicly, don't become their next partner. And Meghan had turned on everyone. Her father, her sister, her brother, her in-laws, her royal staff, her former friends, her Hollywood associates, her own PR teams, her own family. Everyone who fell out of her orbit became a villain in her retelling. So why wouldn't studios assume they'd be next? One Amazon MGM insider described it perfectly. It wasn't what she said in the Netflix doc. It was the pattern behind it. The fear was simple. If we work with her and anything goes wrong, we'll be the next headline. And Jason Orley wasn't willing to gamble his reputation, his rising momentum, or his creative stability on someone who carried that kind of risk. Orley's reputation versus Meghan's pattern. To understand why Orley's question carried so much weight, you need to know this. Hollywood trusts Jason Orley. He doesn't leak. He doesn't sabotage. He doesn't trash colleagues. He doesn't rewrite history. He doesn't thrive on blame. He thrives on work, on reliability, on enthusiasm, on protecting the creative process. He's known as the kind of director who makes sets feel safe, emotionally and professionally. So when he raised the alarm about Meghan, people listened. This wasn't coming from a controversial figure. This wasn't coming from a petty rival. This wasn't coming from someone trying to protect their turf. It was coming from someone the studio deeply respected. And that made the question impossible to ignore. The internal whisper network activates. Here's something people outside the industry don't know. Hollywood has a whisper network. Not the salacious gossip one. Not the scandal one. The professional whisper network. The one where executives privately warn each other about talent who are difficult, unpredictable, dangerous to projects, liabilities to reputations, nightmares to manage. And Meghan's name had been circulating in that network for months. Not maliciously, not gleefully, not cruelly, but cautiously. She shifts narratives too easily. She doesn't take responsibility. She makes every conflict a public event. She reframes events to suit the story she wants to tell next. Those were the whispers. And now Jason Orley had said the quiet part out loud. If she turned on them, she'll turn on us. That was the moment her Hollywood fate shifted. Permanently. The executives realized something crucial. Orley's question didn't just express doubt. It revealed a pattern. A pattern Meghan didn't recognize in herself, but everyone else saw clearly. Meghan didn't betray institutions. She betrayed expectations. She betrayed trust. She betrayed collaborators. People expected loyalty. She gave them reinvention. People expected consistency. She gave them contradictions. People expected clarity. She gave them emotion. Hollywood doesn't dislike emotion, but it despises unpredictability. And Meghan embodied unpredictability in human form. One insider said, "She's a PR disaster waiting to happen. No one wants to be the person she throws under the bus in her next interview." That fear ended everything. The psychology behind Meghan's downfall. Let's dig deeper, beyond the drama, beyond the tension. Meghan's Hollywood problem wasn't her talent. It wasn't her ambition. It wasn't her past. It was her psychological pattern. She overestimates her value and underestimates the damage she caused. She expects loyalty from people she hasn't been loyal to. She wants creative control without delivering creative output. She wants influence without structure. She wants admiration without accountability. That's why her pitch meeting failed. Not because the idea was bad, not because she lacked potential, not because she wasn't charismatic, but because she didn't address the elephant in the room. People didn't trust her, and trust is everything. Orley's follow-up comment blows everything open. Here's the part Meghan never learned. Later that same day, in a smaller internal meeting, someone asked Orley again, "Are you sure we shouldn't give her a chance? Just to hear her out?" And Orley responded with one sentence. "She's a traitor, and a traitor is loyal to no one." Boom. There it was. The line that rippled through the studio. The line that stunned everyone. The line that transformed hesitation into absolute refusal. Because Orley didn't say, "She betrayed the monarchy." He said, "She betrays people. Personal. Not political. Not royal. Human." And in Hollywood, human betrayal is the most unforgivable kind. The aftermath. After Orley's verdict, Meghan's fate at Amazon MGM was sealed. Executives stopped entertaining her proposals. Assistants were instructed to decline politely. Her name became a no-fly zone in development meetings. Her pitches were quietly redirected elsewhere, anywhere else. And Meghan had no idea. She thought she still had leverage. Still had power. Still had her royal aura. Still had her global reach. But she didn't realize the one truth no one in her inner circle dared to tell her. Hollywood wasn't scared of her. Hollywood was tired of her. And tired people stopped trying. And just when it seemed like Meghan's situation couldn't get worse, she made a second attempt to break into the studio. A bold attempt. A confident attempt. An attempt fueled by desperation disguised as determination. But the move she made next, the one she believed would redeem everything, would backfire harder than anything she had done so far. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever watched someone make one tiny mistake, one small, seemingly harmless comment, that instantly destroys the entire room around them? Not a scandal, not a meltdown, not a confrontation, just a sentence. A single sentence that turns admiration into confusion, neutrality into discomfort, and curiosity into irritation. That's what happened the day Meghan Markle unknowingly compared herself to someone she had no business comparing herself to. And when the name slipped from her lips, when the metaphor, the parallel, the symbolic, "I'm just like her" analogy came out, the studio executives didn't just shift in their seats. They froze. Because this wasn't just a wrong comparison. It was an outrageous one. A comparison that revealed more about Meghan's self-perception than any pitch deck could. And Jason Orley? When he heard about the comparison, that was the moment he reportedly snapped internally. That was the moment his doubts hardened into certainty. That was the moment he decided Meghan would never be welcomed at Amazon MGM Studios. But before we get to Orley's reaction, let's go back to the room where it happened. Because the moment itself, the comparison that detonated the entire atmosphere, tells you more about why Meghan failed in Hollywood than any headline ever could. The build-up to the moment. Meghan was deep in her pitch. Her hands were moving with confidence. Her tone was inspirational. Her vocabulary rising with every sentence. Her energy swelling like she was delivering a keynote speech, not a creative pitch. And it wasn't entirely bad. Some executives found her articulate. Some found her charming. Some found her polished. But polished presentations don't impress Hollywood. Results do. Still, Meghan was talking. Talking and talking. Laying out themes, messages, emotions, personal journeys, metaphors, cultural notes, empowerment rhetoric. Everything except the actual content of the project. Yet halfway through the meeting, something shifted in Meghan's tone. She leaned in. She smiled. She slowed her speech as though preparing for impact. And then she said it. The comparison. The analogy that made executives silently gasp inside their minds. I've always felt aligned with the kind of creative journey that Name Redacted represents. She and I are very similar in the way we defy expectations and challenge systems. Record scratch. Silence. Stillness. But not the good kind. Not the awe-inspired kind. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that signals a room is too stunned to respond. Meghan had compared herself, casually, confidently, almost proudly, to a woman who built her career from nothing, had decades of industry success, earned respect from every major studio, created actual award-winning work, delivered hit after hit after hit, was known for loyalty to her teams, had a reputation for elevating others, not herself. This woman was a Hollywood legend, a quiet powerhouse, someone with credibility so strong her name alone could greenlight a project. And Meghan compared herself to her, as if their careers ran parallel, as if their trajectories were equal, as if they faced the same challenges, as if they had earned the same reputation. The executives didn't just freeze because the comparison was wrong. They froze because the comparison was delusional. One insider later said, it was like a college theater student comparing themselves to Meryl Streep. Another said, the room didn't know whether to laugh or look away. A third, she genuinely didn't seem aware of how insulting the comparison was. To everyone, the real problem wasn't the comparison, it was what it revealed. See, Meghan didn't just overestimate her creative standing. She misunderstood how Hollywood sees her. Meghan sees herself as a disruptor, a visionary, a cultural force, a symbolic figure, an undervalued creative genius, someone destined for influence. But Hollywood sees her as unproven, inconsistent, hard to manage, risky, overly self-focused, lacking structure and stability. Great at headlines, weak at deliverables. The comparison exposed that disconnect in neon lights. It told the executives, Meghan does not understand her position. Meghan does not understand her weaknesses. Meghan does not understand the industry. Meghan does not understand her own brand's limitations. The comparison told them everything they needed to know, and everything Meghan didn't want to believe. The executives react silently. No one corrected her. No one interrupted her. No one said, actually, you two are nothing alike. Hollywood etiquette prevented that. Instead, they reacted with tight smiles, stiff shoulders, awkward eye contact, quick notes on their laptops, glances exchanged across the table, a subtle shift from maybe to absolutely not. The meeting did not recover. Not emotionally, not professionally, not conceptually. Meghan kept speaking. She kept gesturing. She kept pitching her themes. But the executives were no longer listening. They were analyzing. Not her content, not her pitch, not her ideas. They were analyzing her judgment. And judgment matters more than talent in Hollywood. Anyone can learn to pitch. Anyone can grow as a creator. Anyone can improve structure. But judgment? Self-awareness? Realistic industry understanding? Those things are non-negotiable. And Meghan had just demonstrated she lacked all three. Orley hears about the meeting and the comparison. If Meghan had stopped it being vague, Orley might have tolerated it. If she had stopped it being overly polished, Orley might have overlooked it. If she had simply pitched a weak project, Orley might have dismissed it politely. But the comparison? That changed everything. Because Meghan didn't just compare herself to a major Hollywood figure. She compared herself to someone Orley admired, someone he publicly praised, someone whose integrity he respected, someone who represented everything Meghan wasn't. So when a colleague later said, "You won't believe who Meghan compared herself to," Orley reacted instantly. He didn't laugh. He didn't shrug. He didn't say, "She's ambitious." His face tightened. His expression darkened. According to insiders, he said, "What? She said that?" His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed, shocked, dismayed. Then he said something that rippled across the studio. "She hasn't earned the right to compare herself to her." That was the moment he mentally closed the door. But he wasn't done. Because the longer he thought about it, the worse it felt. Why the comparison enraged him. To Orley, the comparison wasn't just wrong. It was arrogant, disrespectful, entitled. Meghan was comparing her inconsistent output to someone's legendary body of work. She was comparing her scandals to someone's professionalism. She was comparing her self-created drama to someone's decades of service to the industry. And here's the emotional blade underneath it all. Meghan wanted the respect of a legend without doing the work of a creator. It wasn't just inaccurate. It was insulting to everyone who had climbed the industry ladder legitimately. Orley wasn't willing to let that slide. So he delivered the internal verdict that made Meghan's chances at Amazon MGM drop from slim to zero, the line that killed everything. In a private conversation with a trusted colleague, Orley said, "She's trying to stand on a mountain she didn't climb." That line spread through the studio. People nodded. People whispered. People repeated it during lunch. People referenced it in development talks. But the real blow came a few minutes later. Orley added, "And people who pretend they're legends before they've even started become the biggest liabilities in this business." That was it. The nail in the coffin. The turning point. The irreversible shift. Because now it wasn't just about distrust. It was about credibility. And credibility is the oxygen of Hollywood. Without it, you suffocate. The final reaction in the room. Meghan wrapped up her pitch believing she had impressed everyone. She thanked the executives. She smiled. She left the room with her team feeling triumphant. But the moment the door closed behind her, the executives finally let the truth out. One said, "She's not grounded." Another, "She doesn't know where she stands." Another, "She's comparing herself to someone she can't hold a candle to." That's dangerous judgment. Then someone said the line that summed up the entire meeting. "She doesn't know the difference between fame and credibility." And then came the quiet agreement, spoken or unspoken, that sealed her fate. We're not doing this. The reality Meghan never saw. This chapter is important because it reveals the truth Meghan could never accept. Her downfall didn't come from a scandal. It didn't come from betrayal. It didn't come from hatred. It didn't come from a conspiracy. It didn't come from jealousy. It came from a fundamental misunderstanding of her own position. She thought she was entering the room as a peer to Hollywood legends. But she entered as a risk. She thought she was pitching brilliance. She pitched branding. She thought she was inspiring. She exposed delusion. And the comparison, that one, tiny, careless comparison, was the mirror that showed Hollywood exactly who she had become. Someone who wanted greatness without earning it. But if Meghan thought this meeting was bad, what came next? The backlash that erupted behind closed doors, the words Orley would soon say, and the label Meghan would never escape, would be far, far worse. Because this was just the spark. The wildfire was still ahead. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. There are moments in Hollywood that never make the headlines. Moments that never leak to the press, never appear in interviews, never get documented in Variety or Deadline. Moments whispered in private offices, in quiet hallways, in texts between executives. Moments that change careers without ever touching the public eye. Meghan Markle's downfall at Amazon MGM Studios wasn't loud or public or dramatic. It was a whisper that started with one word. A word spoken behind closed doors. A word that traveled faster than any email, memo, or announcement. A word that, once spoken, could not be unsaid. Traitor. And once that word attached itself to Meghan, everything collapsed. Because in Hollywood, you can be difficult. You can be demanding. You can be dramatic. You can be impossible, but you cannot be untrustworthy. And being labeled a traitor isn't just a bad look. It's a career death sentence. But how did that word escape Jason Orley's mouth? Why did insiders say he spoke it with so much conviction? How did a director known for calm professionalism reach the point of using such a loaded accusation? To understand it, we have to go inside the moment. The moment Orley, usually composed, strategic, measured, finally lost his patience. The moment the room shook. It started small. A junior producer approached Orley after hearing Meghan's pitch recap. They were hesitant, cautious, careful with their words. Jason, I'm not sure if you heard, but Meghan compared herself to. But they didn't even finish the sentence before Orley reacted. He leaned back. His expression darkened. His jaw tightened. Not in anger, in disbelief. He muttered, "You're kidding." But when the producer said, "No, she really did," something shifted inside him. The comparison wasn't just inappropriate. It felt disrespectful to everything Orley valued about Hollywood. Hard work, evolution, growth, humble beginnings. Earning your place. Meghan had skipped the ladder, climbed nothing, and yet wanted to stand next to people who spent decades clawing their way upward. And that's when he said the line that sparked everything. "She's a traitor." The producer stiffened. People nearby glanced over. Everyone heard the temperature in the room drop. It wasn't a word Orley used casually. It wasn't a word he threw around carelessly. It wasn't a word that belonged in casual industry chatter. But in that moment, Orley wasn't talking about royalty or royalty-adjacent drama. He was talking about loyalty, the real kind. What Orley really meant by traitor. To Orley, and to many in Hollywood, a traitor isn't someone who betrays a country or a monarchy. A traitor is someone who betrays people, colleagues, supporters, mentors, teams, staff, friends, people who trusted you. Meghan's pattern wasn't political betrayal. It was interpersonal betrayal. Consider the list. Her father, publicly discarded. Her siblings, ridiculed and erased.